You are listening to Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart, Part 1, January Breeze, written and narrated by Becky Dowdy. Chapter 1. A new neighbor. Kathy expected her at any minute now. She coughed into her elbow as she peered through the narrow opening of her kitchen curtains at the empty cottage across the driveway. It wasn't much more than a shack, really. The roof needed new shingles, the ancient wooden siding was chipped and peeling where the sun beat down mercilessly upon it, and the roots of a massive eucalyptus tree slowly churned up the River Rock patio. Screens were missing from a few of the windows, and the green front door hung at an angle to accommodate the frame that had been put in with a blatant disregard for plumb lines. Its one redeeming quality, a charming little creek that danced along the edge of the patio and on through the coach house trailer park, seemed slightly incongruous with the rest of the ramshackle structure. The inside, according to Myra, wasn't in any better condition. She'd stopped by to visit the day before after doing a thorough cleaning of the place in preparation for the new tenant.
Filthy, Kathy. Horrible. And the carpet. Aye.
Myra often spoke in exclamation marks, bobbing her head for added emphasis, her dark chin-length hair doing the cha-cha around her face.
It's disgusting. When I told Eddie that it needed to be replaced, he said they won't do it because it's less than 5 years old. But that carpet looks more like 55 to me. And the shower.
She went on and on until Kathy interrupted her with a glass of her favorite boxed wine, kept chilled in the refrigerator for just such visits.
Why are you so worked up? This new one will come and go just like all the others.
Myra took a long sip.
I know. But this one...
She shrugged her bony shoulders.
I want her to like it.
The sweet tart drink puckered her lips.
I want her to like us.
So, what's new? You want everyone to like us.
Myra left a few minutes later, her basket of dirty rags and cleaning supplies hoisted on one scrawny hip.
Don't let her catch you spying on her tomorrow, Kathy-la. I mean it.
A few minutes before 10, a truck pulled in. One of those little Toyota pickups that simply refused to die, its once royal blue paint faded and oxidized by the California sunshine. The woman driving wore a pair of oversized blue-tinted sunglasses, and her mahogany red hair threatened to escape a clip at the crown of her head.
Young, Kathy quickly labeled her. Probably between boyfriends. I give her 6 months tops.
Her eyebrows lifted with surprise as the woman maneuvered into the parking space in front of the ramshackle house, giving her a full view of the contents of the truck bed. Plants. No mattresses, no dressers or coffee tables, no boxes covered in packing tape and black marker. Plants in huge clay pots and delicate ceramic bowls, hanging baskets and galvanized steel buckets. Verdant bundles wrapped in twine and burlap to protect them from the brilliant January cold. Kathy shot a guilty glance over her shoulder at the one scraggly philodendron on a plant stand in the corner of the room. Between her irregular watering schedule and the fact that the dogs couldn't resist chewing on the few brave tendrils that managed to creep over the lip of the yellow pot, it was a miracle the plant was still alive. Kathy loved plants, but she spent too much of her time and limited resources in futile efforts to add them to her life. She turned back to the window just as the woman threw open her driver's side door and started talking, gesturing, and nodding effusively. It took a moment, but it finally dawned on Kathy that she was conversing with the plants themselves, making her way around the truck bed, cooing and smiling fondling leaves and petals, cheering and clapping her hands. Kathy muttered to the old and rather obese Labrador that wandered out from under the table. "She's talking to her plants, like they understand her or something." She twirled a finger in circles at her temple and rolled her eyes. "I just don't get some people, Heidi." The dog responded by licking her hand and flopping its tail against her legs. She turned away from the window and coughed deeply again. She hated the way her lungs felt, as though they were being shaken around inside her chest like a baby's toy rattle. But the cough was something she'd earned after 40 years of smoking, and she'd learned to live with it. When she caught the seasonal cold, however, it always frightened her a little. Sometimes she'd cough so long and hard, she feared her insides would fly out of her mouth. She made her way through the obstacle course of her kitchen to the sofa and dropped into one corner, strategically situating herself so she could monitor both her favorite morning soap opera and the activity outside the window. Heidi clambered up onto the cushion next to her. "That's all we need, huh, little girl? Another crazy neighbor." She sighed loudly and leaned her head back on the cushions behind her. Heidi blinked once and sighed too. Kathy woke with a start, her open mouth snoring loud inside her stuffed-up head, and she peered up at the clock again. She'd been asleep for over an hour. Heidi stood at the front door, scratching to get out, and fat little Trixie waddled out from the tiny bedroom to see what was going on, her stubby tail wiggling frantically. Bella Bassett let out one deep woof from where she lounged on the end of Kathy's bed. Kathy sat up, massaged a crick in her neck, then turned to check on her new neighbor. She could hardly believe the transformation that had taken place outside her window while she napped. She forgot all semblance of subterfuge and pulled the sheer panel back to see more clearly. Squinting, her eyes bleary from sleep, she struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. She turned and snatched up the set of binoculars off the end table beside the sofa. They still technically belonged to her ex-husband, but he'd never been back to claim them, so she put them to good use, keeping an eye on the comings and goings in the park. It was rather convenient that the park's laundry station was practically outside her front door. On the stoop of space number 12 sat a huge terracotta pot overflowing with fluttering yellow honeysuckle, in flower in January, that stretched its tendrils up to the roof and along the low eaves. It formed a natural archway leading to the front entry of the house, and it looked like it had been growing there for years. Delicate clusters of pink and purple blossoms fireworked out of a peat moss basket hanging from a decorative hook mounted on the wall below the porch light, softening the askew lines of the doorframe. She thought they might be nemesia or some kind of salvia, but she wasn't certain. On the patio, in huge pots, red, pink, and white petals hovering over dark foliage had to be cyclamen. Kathy recognized them because they grew right outside her own picket fence, but the only time she'd seen them look so healthy and bloom so enthusiastically was on the shelf at the Home Improvement Center, where the plants were all on steroids. Troughs of bushy geraniums were just on the brink of flowering. What looked like a huge camellia was in full bloom, and were those yellow blossoms African daisies? In January? An old-fashioned hydrangea and a spike-leafed aloe vera odd-coupled in a pedestal urn that was dark with the patina of age and countless waterings. Begonias, blue forget-me-nots, and frilly ferns were tucked into shady spots all over the patio and nestled among the roots of a mulberry tree that spread its branches over the little creek. In the flower bed beneath the front window, thick-leaved jades, standard issue in most rentals in Southern California, showed off the last of their winter blooms. Some quick and aggressive weed excavation had uncovered the 2 rose bushes that had somehow survived over the years and exposed a few saucy snapdragons and a blanket of alyssum the weeds hadn't choked out completely. The roses had been hacked back to sticks, and Kathy wondered if the woman realized it was way late in the season for trimming roses. Wind chimes and friar bells hung in the rafters of the porch, their various tones creating harmonies in the breeze, while suncatchers sent rainbows of light dancing across the tiny yard. Kathy looked over at the clock on the wall for the 3rd time, feeling a little like Rip Van Winkle waking up from his 100-year snooze. How the hula did she do that? Chapter 2. Heidi and Trixie were snuffling and scratching with renewed fervor, and Kathy realized she had a perfect excuse to spy on her neighbor more openly. "Oh, all right. Let's all go outside for some fresh air." She pushed open the front door and was nearly bowled over as the dogs scampered past her and out into the yard. "Hey!" she cried out, unprepared for their exuberance. "Are you all right?" Kathy's eyes flew to the gate, even more unprepared for the woman who stood there. Oh my, you scared me." She pressed a hand to her chest and took a few deep breaths. "I have a heart condition, you know." Her words came out more gruffly than she'd intended. "Oh dear, I did not know that. I didn't mean to startle you. I just came by to introduce myself. I'm your new neighbor." By now, the dogs were snuffling and pawing at the gate, trying to get out. Heidi was actually up on her 2 back legs, her front paws resting on the crossbar, as she leaned her head into the woman's stroking hand. "Hello, pretty girl. You are a lovely old dear. Yes, you are." "Careful. They don't really do well with strangers." "Of course they don't. Neither do I. I mean, strangers are so strange, right?" She gave Heidi one last scratch behind the ear, reached over and ruffled Trixie's mop, then held aloft the rectangular twig basket she carried. "This is for you, and your pups, of course." "Oh, well, thank you." Kathy fumbled for words. Oh dear, what would Lucy say when she saw treats for everyone but her? "And I don't want to forget this." The woman withdrew a small drawstring pouch from her pocket and tucked it inside the basket. "This is for your kitty. She came by earlier and fell in love with it. When she wandered this way, I guessed you were her person." Kathy made her way down the 2 steps and across the small yard to the gate. She thought she smelled vanilla and cinnamon, and her mouth began to water in anticipation. The image of a large kitchen, a small boy, and the flowery aftermath of several batches of Christmas cookies flashed through her mind, and she smiled at the memory. She would have to call her Makani tonight. She wondered if he was eating well. Her neighbor thrust an open hand over the gate. "I'm Willow Goodhope." Of course, Kathy thought as she took the proffered hand. Even her name sounds organic. "I'm Kathy, and welcome. I was going to come over and see if you need anything, or any help. I mean, moving can be so much work, but, well, She was flustered again, at a loss for polite excuses. "Work? On a day like this?" Willow waved a hand dismissively. "Oh no, this is a day for doing absolutely nothing. In fact, I'm going to go put the tea kettle on, curl up with a good book, and revel in my new home. I just had to make sure the plants were settled in first. But the rest? Well, moving in will take care of itself, you know." "How did you do all of that so quickly?" Kathy jutted her chin in the direction of the cottage. "It just doesn't seem possible." She didn't intend to sound rude, but she really wanted to know. She loved her little yard and put hours into it every week, but she'd lived here over 10 years now, and she couldn't remember it ever looking so lovely. Somehow, this Willow Goodhope had turned the pre-existing eyesore across the way into a greeting card in little more than an hour. The plants? I know. They just settled right in as though they belong here. Willow held up her hands, palms facing Kathy. God's incredibly creative, isn't he? And he gave me green thumbs, so I get to participate. She beamed, as if that explained everything. The hands she held out for examination were roughened and calloused, dirt under the nails. It seemed inconsistent with everything else about her, but it made perfect sense, really. The plants didn't climb into those pots on their own. Well, thank you again, and welcome again. Kathy patted the basket, then snapped her fingers at the dogs. You girls stop sniffing the neighbor. Go on inside now. Go. She looked up, a little embarrassed by their exuberance. I'm really sorry. They usually just bark at people and then run away. It's fine. They're just curious. Yes, you are, aren't you? Willow reached down, gave Heidi's ear a gentle tug, and turned to leave, calling over her shoulder, Don't hesitate to visit, Kathy. I mean it. Any time, okay? She fluttered her fingers in the air and headed back across the gravel drive to her own place. Kathy stood for a few moments longer, watching the woman's long, full skirt sweeping along the ground behind her. What an odd cookie, she thought. Remembering the promise of cinnamon sugar cookies, she glanced down at the basket in her arms. She lifted the cloth that covered the contents and studied them, perplexed and delighted at the same time. The Christmas cookie aroma was gone. Nestled in the folds of a currant-colored dish towel was a set of 2 Oriental-style mugs with no handles. Inside one was a small honey bear bottle, in the other 2 old-fashioned tea balls on chains. A muslin drawstring bag was stuffed with something crinkly and lumpy, and a stitched-on label gave a description of the contents in pretty scrawled handwriting. Elderberries, flowers, ginger and lemon zest. Add a dollop of honey, and you'll be sure to get some rest. Colds, coughs, fevers, and malaise, they'll all flee, and the flu will fly away. The bag for Lucy held a stuffed crocheted ball on the end of an elastic string. Kathy could smell the pungent catnip, and something else earthy and pleasant, and she had no doubt Lucy would indeed appreciate the toy. The basket also contained a wax paper packet of peanut butter cookies, the telltale crisscross pattern on top of each one. Kathy lifted them to her nose and wondered if perhaps she'd been mistaken. Maybe it was these she'd smelled earlier, and not cinnamon sugar cookies after all. She tore open an end of the package, pulled a cookie out, and took a bite. Not very sweet. In fact, they were almost a little salty, but the peanut butter flavor was rich and robust, making up for any other minor defects the crunchy cookies might have. They'd probably taste better dunked in cold milk. She lifted the edge of the towel, searching for the promised pup treats, but the basket was empty. "Oh," she exclaimed, realizing her mistake. "These must be for you." Her dogs still sat pining at the gate for the neighbor who had disappeared inside her little home. Kathy, on the other hand, was greatly relieved that Willow hadn't been there to witness her faux pas. "Come on, you naughty kids. Look." She waved a cookie above their heads and laughed out loud. "I have treats for you, and I have to admit they're the best doggy treats I've ever tasted." Chapter 3. Willow's hair was woven into a braid that swished back and forth behind her as she worked. The yard was covered in leaves that had swept in during the heavy winds the night before, and she was busy raking them into heaping piles. She hummed to herself and paused periodically to look up into the branches over her head at a bird that seemed to be conversing with her. Kathy and Myra stood at the window together, discussing the new neighbor.
"I just don't get it. How did she know I was sick?"
"Don't look at me." Myra shrugged as she poked around through the contents of the gift basket. Holding up the bag of peanut butter cookies, she giggled. "Can I try one? I've never tasted a dog treat before."
"You're such a silly old lady, Myra."
Kathy didn't mean for her words to be unkind, and she knew Myra knew it. They were both silly and old. That's why they got along.
"Do you want some tea with that biscuit? We can be proper British ladies while we spy on the new girl."
"Your skin is too brown to be British, Kathila, and my accent is too strong. No one would believe us." Myra bit into a cookie and reached over to pull back the curtain.
"I called Makani last night."
Myra spun around, her eyes wide. "You did what?"
"I called my son last night. He answered the phone. We talked."
Kathy kept her hands busy filling the tea balls with some of the mixture from the muslin bag. Then she rinsed the mugs in hot water so the tea wouldn't cool too quickly. She put generous amounts of honey in both, knowing her friend well enough to assume she'd want it extra sweet. Myra handed her half-eaten dog treat to Heidi, who was lounging on the sofa. She pressed both hands to her flat chest. "Tell me all about it, Kathila. I can't believe it." The kettle whistled. Kathy snatched it up and filled both mugs, then handed one to Myra. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed, but she could feel a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth.
"We talked about Christmas, about good memories. He said he missed my cooking. He has a son, you know."
"I know, you told me many times. How old is he now? He's named after his daddy, right?"
"Makani Jr., of course. My boy isn't going to let his son forget where he came from. They call him Kani for short, just like I used to call Makani when he was little. Kani will be 4 in April."
Kathy had never met her only grandchild, and it nearly broke her heart when she let herself dwell on it. She'd only seen pictures of him when he was a tiny baby, but she was certain she'd recognize him instantly if she ever saw him. She vividly remembered Makani's squishy cheeks and big brown eyes. She didn't think little Connie's features would be too different. She lifted the steaming mug close to her mouth and blew on the surface of the liquid to cool it.
"I wish they lived closer."
After a few moments of silence between them, Myra took a sip of her tea. "Oh, my goodness, Kathila!" She was cradling the mug in both hands. "This is delicious. It tastes like my sangria, but hot." Kathy chuckled, glad for the change in subject. Her conversation with her son, the first they'd had in years, had been achingly sweet, and she wanted to cherish it close to her heart a little longer.
"Your sangria tastes like juice. It comes in a box, Myra. A big juice box for a big kid."
"Oh, leave me alone. I hardly drink at all anymore. My doctor told me I had to quit. He said my liver isn't going to last much longer." Myra sighed dramatically. "He said I'm probably going to die soon."
"We're all going to die, silly. Some of us just sooner than others. It's what we all moved here for, to die. And I bet I'll go before you do. My heart isn't going to last any longer than your liver, even if you do ever quit drinking for real."
Kathy sipped her tea, enjoying the way the tangy flavors soothed her throat. She could feel warmth flooding her chest from the inside out,
and she sighed deeply. Sounds morbid, doesn't it? But it's true.
That we're all going to die?
Myra shoved Heidi over to make room for her skinny backside on the couch.
No, that we all came here to die. Think about it.
Kathy shoved poor Heidi off onto the floor altogether and dropped into the corner the dog vacated.
Everyone who lives in our park.
She nodded her head sagely.
They all came here to die. Do you have plans to move again?
Me? Hey, never again.
Myra shook her head emphatically.
Neither do I. Patty and Richard next door aren't going anywhere either. They're living off his disability, and their son. He's gay, so they won't ever have any grandchildren.
Don't say that, Kathila. You don't know that.
Yes, I do. We met his boyfriend, Myra.
That was his roommate. That doesn't mean they're together.
Myra squirmed a little, clearly uneasy with the topic.
Roommates, Myra.
Kathy was childishly enjoying her friend's discomfort.
They're not in college anymore, and they were holding hands. I saw them.
I used to hold hands with my friends when I was younger. That didn't make me that way.
Gay, Myra. They're gay. Which means there won't be any grandchildren. Patty and Richard have come here to die. Then there's Joe. The way he fries all his food, I'm surprised he's still looking so good.
Myra's eyes lit up.
I know. That man, he's a handsome one. If I was a little younger, I might ask him to cook for me.
Kathy rolled her eyes.
You're 10 years younger than he is already. How much younger do you need to be? It doesn't matter anyway. He's already got a lady friend. You've seen her. She comes out from Los Angeles about once a month to visit. Her daughter drops her off on her way to Palm Springs.
I've seen her. She's the real reason I haven't asked him out.
Besides, you're obviously not his type, Myra. She's at least a foot taller than you are, and she still wears high heels and makeup. You can't compete with that.
Myra looked down at her feet encased in the inelegant, bulky socks she was wearing. Her faded blue rubber boots were outside on Kathy's porch. Then she shrugged.
Joe has bad knees. He couldn't bend over far enough to kiss me, so it would never work.
Myra, I should send you out into the cold for putting that sick thought into my head. Yuck!
Kathy scowled disgustedly, then picked up where she left off.
Shelley Little and her cats. You know how that's going to end.
What do you mean? She's not old.
When you're a cat lady, age has no bearing. One day, those cats are going to turn on her, and Eddie will find her face down.
Stop it! Don't say it, Kathy. Aye, what kind of movies are you watching these days?
And speaking of Eddie,
Kathy continued, grinning capriciously over her friend's ruffled feathers,
he's got his own little kingdom right here. He's the perfect trailer park manager. No woman, no kids. His mother tucked in 2 trailers over. He's not going anywhere. Not in a million years. He's king of the coach, as far as he's concerned. They'll have to crowbar him out of this place, him and his old Ford.
How do you know he doesn't have a woman? Maybe he's got a girlfriend somewhere else.
Myra stood up to get a refill from the kettle. Kathy patted the binoculars on the end table.
I have my ways. His mom does his laundry for him. I've seen her folding his clothes. Besides, he only has 8 or 10 teeth, and that gut is something else. He doesn't have a woman.
You're so mean. And nosy,
Myra said, peering out the window to see what new developments were taking place across the way.
So, what kind of name is Willow? I mean, I know it's the name of a tree, but it sounds like a hippie name, doesn't it? She's too young to be a child of the 60s. Maybe it's New Age or some Middle Eastern thing. I wonder if she has a boyfriend. And you call me nosy?
Myra reached for the kettle and offered Kathy a refill too.
So tell me something. If everyone comes here to die, why would someone so alive come here to live?
Chapter 4. When Myra finally left, the sun was reaching for the horizon with shimmering rays. It was going to be bitterly cold tonight, and the wind had picked up again, unsettling the dogs, making them whine and whimper incessantly. They clambered onto the sofa next to Kathy, and together they sat in the warm comfort of their little home as twilight turned into evening. Even Bella Bassett managed to slide off the bed and waddle across the floor to drop in a heap at Kathy's feet. Her mind wandered back to the phone conversation with her son the night before. It had been over 3 years since they'd spoken in anything other than angry words. When Connie was born, McConnie wanted to contact his father. He said he wanted to tell him about his new grandson, about how it felt to be a dad. But Kathy knew there was more to it than that. McConnie, having now held his own son, really wanted to know how Paul could have walked away from him. He wanted to confront his father, to make him admit he was wrong to leave, and to tell his father that he, McConnie, would never abandon his son the way Paul had abandoned him. But Kathy knew the men in her life too well to stand back and let that conversation take place. She knew the answers and the words McConnie needed from his father would never come from the man who'd beaten her bloody time and time again, who'd run around with other women even while she was in the hospital delivering their son. She knew why Paul left. He refused to believe McConnie was really his. He liked to tell her he only shot blanks, so she must have been sleeping around on him and got herself knocked up by one of her lovers. None of it was true, but Paul didn't want to hear it. He just moved on one day. He packed a bag, got in his car, and drove away. As far as Kathy knew, they were still married after all these years, but she'd had the foresight to put her maiden name, Kekoa, which meant brave soldier, on her son's birth certificate, giving McConnie his Hawaiian roots as his foundation. She'd left the father's signature line empty. And 26 years later, she wasn't going to give Paul the opportunity to fill in the empty places for their son, even if she did still know how to reach him. McConnie's requests had turned to demands, making him sound remarkably like his abusive father. And Kathy, reacting with the old rage she still had inside, lashed out at him, accusing him of being just like his old man. "You're no better than he is, little man. You're cut from the same cloth. Have you taken a swing at your wife yet?" McConnie hung up on her, and she knew she deserved it. She gave him a few weeks, expecting him to call back and apologize. When he didn't, she called him, prepared to give him what little information she had about Paul. But he refused to take her calls. He sent her letters and cards back unopened. And after a year, then another, and a third had gone by, Kathy stopped hoping for reconciliation. Christmas was always the worst. For so long it had just been the two of them and the assorted pets they'd had over the years, celebrating the season together. Kathy put on Christmas music the first day of December and played it nonstop in their home for the whole month. They put up their little yard sale tree with the stiff wire branches that could handle the weight of homemade ornaments of modeling clay, rocks from their heart-shaped rock collection, and other assorted things they could drum up. One year, they made Hot Wheels the theme of their tree. They hit all the local thrift stores and bought up as many of the little cars and trucks as they could afford, then taken all of Makani's from his toy box and tied each one to the branches of the tree with red curling ribbon and tinsel. It was a little boy's dream. And cookies. Santa had to have his milk and cookies, and just in case the jolly elf decided to drop in a little early to see if Makani was being good, the boy had taken it upon himself to make sure that the cookie jar was always full. Those were some of Kathy's favorite Christmas memories, baking cinnamon sugar cookies and drinking eggnog and hot chocolate with her boy. How she missed him. How she'd missed the man he'd grown up to be, the father she knew he was, so different from the father he'd had, and his son, who surely would grow up to be just like Makani. Her arms ached to hold that little boy. And now, it seemed that anything was possible. Now, because Willow Goodhope showed up on her doorstep smelling like delicious memories, there was hope. For whatever reason, they hadn't talked about anything too serious, Makani had taken her call. For whatever reason, he'd talked and laughed and remembered with her. For whatever reason, the door that had been slammed and locked between them seemed to be opening up. Makani promised to call again on the weekend. Little Connie was already in bed, but her son assured her she could speak to her grandson on Saturday. "He knows who you are, Mom. He points at your picture and says, 'Zat Gamma.'" Too emotional to ask him to tell her more, she'd said goodbye with the flicker of hope burning inside of her. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. It was dark inside now, and she reached over to turn on the lamp. Time for dinner. Bella Bassett was so old and arthritic that Kathy hated to make her go outside to do her business, but as soon as they all finished eating, Kathy bundled up and herded the dogs out into the night. She didn't care that her thrift store men's coat was a teal popular in the 80s. It was lined with fleece, and the hood was huge, so she could pull it almost closed over her face, protecting her from the biting air. "I'm an island girl, God. A cool breeze is nice, but this wind? My blood is like ice in my veins." She shivered on the top step, waiting while Bella Bassett wandered around the yard with Heidi and Trixie. Glancing over at Willow's cottage, her eyes widened with delight as the outside light flickered off, then a myriad of twinkle lights lit up the entryway instead. Many of the plants were draped in burlap again, but those under the cover of the porch roof shimmered in the soft glow as the wind made them dance, reminding her of a Thomas Kincaid painting. It looked so inviting over there, and she didn't want to look away. The crooked green door swung open, and Willow flitted out into the cold. She had her hands up over her eyes, her fingers cracked just enough to see where she was going as she made her way out into the little yard toward Kathy. She looked up, saw Kathy watching her, and waved. "I haven't seen it yet, but what do you think? Does it look enchanted?" Enchanted. That was exactly the way it looked. "You're a little wacko, you know that?" Kathy called back. "Where's your jacket, girl?" The laugh that burst out of Willow's mouth surprised Kathy almost as much as the lights had. It was loud, unchecked, and contagious. She couldn't keep from smiling in response. "I'm so excited I can't even feel the cold. Okay, count to 3 for me, will you?" The girl had reached Kathy's fence and was leaning over to pet all 3 dogs who'd gathered to say hello. "Count to 3?" Kathy asked. Yes, it's the ceremony of lights, and you're the new mistress of ceremonies. Willow clapped her hands. I can't look until you count to 3.
Did you fall off the ladder while you were putting those up?
Kathy shook her head, but made her way down the steps to stand at the gate near Willow. She smiled at the childlike anticipation on her neighbor's face. Come on, Kathy. Willow reached over and grabbed her by the shoulders, gently shaking her. Count! I can't stand the wait any longer.
Okay already.
1, 2, 3. 3. Willow cried out the number in unison with Kathy, then spun around, her hair, loosed from the braid she'd worn earlier, fluttering around her shoulders. Oh my, she breathed. Then she was laughing again, twirling like a little girl, the wind catching strands of her copper locks and tossing them in her face. Isn't it beautiful? Kathy was laughing now, too. It is very pretty, she agreed. Then she remembered her manners.
Oh, I had some of your tea today. It was very good.
She cleared her throat.
I, also had one of the peanut butter cookies before I realized they were for the dogs. You should have labeled those, you know.
She was still a little embarrassed by the mistake, but something about Willow made her think her neighbor would appreciate the story. Oh, Kathy, Willow gasped, her eyes alight with humor. I'm just glad I didn't put raw liver in them or fish guts or something terrible like that.
I am too.
Kathy's brow furrowed a little as she thought about the afternoon she'd spent in Myra's company.
You know, I haven't been coughing much at all since I drank your tea. So, how did you know I was feeling sick?
Oh, I didn't know. I was just talking to God while I was puttering around yesterday, asking him what he thought you might like from my garden. The tea was his idea. I tried to tell him you might prefer a cordial or some jam, but he insisted on the tea. Willow's expression was sincere as she spoke, one hand clutching at her wayward hair, pulling it all forward over her shoulder. It looked to Kathy like she was beginning to feel the cold, but she continued talking anyway. January is notorious around these parts for blowing in all kinds of fun stuff like colds and flu bugs. It even blew me into your life this year. Willow laughed, bouncing up and down on her heels and hugging herself. That elderberry tea is one of my favorites. It helps boost the immune system, keeps the sinuses clear, and works like a charm on fevers and muscle aches. I love it, and I'm glad to hear you love it too. If you're sick, you just keep drinking that all day. I can make you more in a heartbeat. You'll be amazed at how much faster you get well. Then she grinned and lifted her shoulders up around her ears. I love it when I hear him correctly, and he probably loves it when I listen, right? Kathy nodded, unsure of how else to respond. She often talked to God, but he didn't talk back. Probably because she only talked to him when she was complaining about something. She'd worked hard to get to where she was, and even though she wasn't anywhere great, at least she'd managed to do it on her own. God hadn't been much help. Not really. He was more like an imaginary friend, someone she could talk to in the middle of the night without worrying about him running off to gossip about her to someone else. Okay, now I'm feeling the cold. But I'm so glad you were out here to share this with me. I hate celebrating alone. Even in the shifting light of the blustery night, Kathy could see something like longing flit across Willow's face, and she felt like she'd just glimpsed something private, something she was not intended to see. It made her uncomfortable, and she didn't like it. She cleared her throat and gruffly declared, If I'm all you got, Willow Goodhope, then you're really alone. You're even worse off than I am. Then she covered her mouth with her hand, the words sounding cruel and insensitive. Willow's shoulders dropped like a deflated balloon, and the sudden glisten in her eyes only made Kathy feel worse. "I'm sorry. That sounded awful. I can't believe I said that. I'm such a party pooper."
"Don't say that. You're not a party pooper. You made a perfect MC for my celebration tonight. You played right along, you counted for me, and you laughed with me. That's more than most would have done for a completely ridiculous stranger." But Willow wasn't looking at her. She was staring at her little house with its pretty white lights and the lovely flowers, and Kathy could tell the girl wanted to disappear inside it again, hidden away, safe from the world. Kathy shuffled back and forth, mortified by her thoughtless words. She did that often, she realized. She'd taken the old "think before you speak" adage and tweaked it so that she spoke exactly what she was thinking. How many other people had she hurt by the thoughts spilling unfiltered out of her mouth? Makani. Her words had nearly destroyed their relationship. It wasn't his fault his father walked out. It wasn't his fault he wanted answers. It wasn't his fault she still harbored bitterness and anger and resentment toward Paul for all the times he'd pounded on her, called her terrible things, pushed her away with his cruel words, the way she, Kathy, was always doing to others. Makani, his wife Sylvia, had she ever said anything kind to the girl who had stolen her baby's heart? She honestly couldn't remember. Maybe there was more to Makani's silence than just the things she'd said to him. Maybe it had something to do with what she never said to the woman he loved. And Myra? She hurt Myra's feelings almost every day. She didn't mean to, not really, but Myra was just so easy to poke at. She couldn't count the times her dear friend had stormed out the gate, tears in her eyes, threatening never to return again. What about Patty next door? That poor woman spent every waking moment taking care of grumpy old disabled Richard. But did Kathy ever offer to help? No, she was too busy making snide remarks to Patty about useless, worthless men. It didn't matter that Richard was a bitter old coot. Patty needed to be encouraged and acknowledged for standing by him when he didn't deserve her, not torn down and demoralized for doing what she could to make Richard's life better. What Kathy wouldn't give to have someone in her life who refused to leave her side, even when she wasn't very nice. "You're not ridiculous, Willow. I think you're lovely. I think what you've done to your place is amazing. My dogs like you. My cat likes you. I like you. And I hope you won't stay a stranger for long." The words didn't come easy. She had to practically wrench them out of her mouth. But she meant every single one of them. "I'm so glad you feel that way, Kathy. I don't mind being ridiculous, and I really don't mind being alone most of the time. But I hate being a stranger." Was this magical creature really all alone? Was there no one in her life to share these moments with? Kathy knew what it felt like to be alone, and most of the time she didn't mind it either. But at least she knew the people around her. At least she knew she could call Eddie if a faucet broke or the roof leaked. At least she knew Myra would come running if Kathy's heart started acting up again. Well, maybe she could be Willow's at least. In fact, maybe she should try being Patty's at least, or Myra's at least, or even Shelley Little's at least. Someone should take it upon themselves to check on the strange cat lady every once in a while. Why not Kathy?
Maybe it was time to put Paul's binoculars away and step outside her comfort zone. Chapter 5. I have a new motto. Kathy beamed at her friend through the screen door. Myra, still in her bathrobe, stared at her in shock.
What are you doing here, Kathila? Is everything okay? Is it your heart?
Myra clutched the lapels of her robe together.
I was just getting ready to take a shower.
Are you going to invite me in, or am I going to have to stand out here in the cold, freezing my fingers off? Kathy knew her words were still gruff, but they were much nicer than what she might have said even yesterday.
Of course, come in. Sorry, I'm just not used to you coming to see me. I always come to see you.
Myra stepped back, then closed the heavy front door after Kathy was safely inside.
Let me go get dressed. There's still coffee left if you want some.
No, Myra. This will only take a minute. I just came to tell you my new motto. Are you ready for it?
What do you mean, Kathy? Are you sure you're okay? I didn't know you had an old motto.
Myra dropped into a chair at her circa 1970s dinette set and picked up her coffee cup, taking a sip and frowning.
What is this motto?
A motto. It's like words to live by.
I know what a motto is.
Well, I have new words to live by. Are you ready?
Sure.
Myra was getting impatient, Kathy could tell, but she didn't care. She was accustomed to Myra's frustration. Try on, don't spy on people. Kathy smiled and spread her arms in an anticipatory gesture. Myra just stared blankly at her. Well, what do you think?
What do I think? I think you're losing your marbles. What does that mean? You're going to try on people? I get the not spying part. I've been telling you to stop doing that for years. But trying them on instead? Loco.
Kathy grinned. Okay, so it's silly, but it means something to me. I'm going to stop sitting at my window spying on people through my binoculars.
Paul's binoculars, Myra corrected her.
Kathy continued without acknowledging the interruption. And start trying on new friends, like trying on new clothes. See how they fit, how we get along. I'm going to try to make some friends here at the coach house.
Well, it's about time. I'm always telling you that you need to have someone to check on you, someone besides me who won't die before you do. My doctor says my kidneys are in such bad shape that one of them is bound to give out soon.
Then I'll be here to take care of you. Maybe you could have one of mine.
What? Why would I want your deceased kidney?
My kidneys are in great shape. You're the one with diseased organs.
I'm not diseased. My body is just failing me. Ask my doctor.
I don't need to ask your doctor, you old... Kathy smacked her forehead and clamped her lips shut. This new motto was going to be a little more trying than she'd planned on. Look, Myra, I'm not always very nice to you.
No, you're usually mean to me.
I know, and I'm sorry. Myra stared at her, a look of distrust in her eyes, and Kathy continued. I just want you to know how much I appreciate you as my friend. I don't know anyone else who would put up with me, not even my own son, the way you do. I want to try to be a little easier to put up with. This is me trying. Myra's mouth hung open, her eyes wide, and Kathy chuckled. This is me trying you on. See how it works? Stupid, I know, but it makes sense to me. She shrugged and turned to go. I didn't want another day to go by without you knowing that I'm glad you're my friend. I'm going to try to be a better friend to you, Myra. Just as she reached for the handle of the door, Myra bolted up out of her chair and threw her arms around Kathy. "I'm glad you're my friend too, Kathy La. I like your motto. It's not stupid at all."
"You should come up with some words to live by," Kathy said after Myra released her.
"Words to live by? Oh no, I need words to die by. I won't live much longer, remember?"
Kathy rolled her eyes. "You'll outlive me, silly old friend." A happy little grin lit up Myra's face, and Kathy waved goodbye. "I'm off to see Shelley now."
"You're what?"
Myra's expression was priceless. She was even more shocked by Kathy's stated intentions than she'd been by Kathy's appearance on her front porch. "Shelley Little, cat lady. I think she needs a friend too. Someone who doesn't have 4 legs and a tail."
"You're crazy, Kathy La. Loco."
"You said that already. If this is crazy, then I'm okay with that." Kathy headed down the steps and crossed the gravel road that circled around the park. She patted the ball of catnip in her pocket, mentally promising Lucy she'd request a replacement from Willow. Tomorrow, she was going to stop in at Joe's place and ask him for the recipe of a simple meal she could cook for Patty and Richard. No one had much money at the coach house, so she had no qualms about telling him to keep her limited larder and resources in mind. She was sure a night off in the kitchen might do Patty some good. She was also sure Richard wouldn't so much as utter a thank you, but that wasn't going to stop her from trying them on, too. There didn't seem to be anyone home at Shelley's house, but she could hear the scuffling and mewling of cats behind the door. One catnip ball wasn't going to be enough. Maybe it was providential that Shelley wasn't home. She'd go right now and ask Willow about making more of the toys. She'd offer to pay for them, even if it meant buying a few at a time. When she reached the driveway between their 2 houses, Kathy paused, suddenly feeling uncertain about her plan. Should she bother her new neighbor already? The poor thing hadn't even been here a week yet, and here she was thinking about asking her for favors. Besides, her heart was beating pretty hard with the walk she'd taken around the park. Maybe she should go lie down instead. She could introduce herself to Shelley and her cats another day. Before she could chicken out, she marched across the little yard and made her way carefully up the steps and under the honeysuckle archway onto Willow's front porch. The sound of weeping stopped her in her tracks. Deep, heart-wrenching sobs were coming from inside the cottage, and Kathy wanted to cover her ears against it. The sadness she'd seen on her neighbor's face the night before was real, and by the sound of things, it went very deep. Poor girl. What could she do? How could she help? She'd have to talk to Myra about this. She turned to go, trying to slip away without being noticed. She had just cleared the bottom step when the front door opened, and Willow stepped outside, a moss-green shawl draped around her shoulders for warmth. "Kathy, were you looking for me?" Willow's voice cracked a little, but other than her red-rimmed eyes and pink-tipped nose, there were no other telltale signs that she'd been sobbing only moments before. "I didn't hear you knock." "I'm sorry to bother you. I'll come back another time." Kathy felt terrible. "You're not bothering me, not at all. What can I do for you?" She was putting on a brave face, making Kathy feel even worse, but there didn't seem to be any way to politely leave now. "I was just wondering about this catnip ball. You made it, right?" She held up the toy by the string. "I did. The herbs are from my garden, and the ball is just a quick little knitting job." Willow had moved forward until she was standing under the honeysuckle. With her pale features that closely matched the creamy flowers on the vine overhead, Kathy thought she looked like a growing thing herself in her green shawl, her mahogany hair loose around her shoulders. "Would you like another one?" "Actually, I was wondering if I could pay you to make some more for me. Maybe 5 or 6 of them?" 5 or 6 of them? Your kitty likes them that much? Willow's laugh burst out, albeit a little subdued compared to the night before. "Oh, no, they're not for Lucy." Kathy met her eyes. "I'm following your example. I'm going to go officially meet Shelley Little down at the other end of the park. She's lived here for a few years now, and even though I learned her name right away, I never bothered to introduce myself to her." She could feel the heat of a blush creep up her neck and was glad for her dark skin. "You made me want to change that." "Oh, Kathy, that's lovely." Willow came down the steps and wrapped her in a quick hug. Then she stepped back. There was that cookie smell again. It must be her lotion or shampoo. "Thank you for coming to see me. I needed a reminder that God still loves me, and He sent me you." Her tender smile didn't completely replace the sadness in her eyes, but relief settled around Kathy's shoulders. "Now for those catnip toys," Willow declared. "I just so happen to have several of them on hand. I'll be right back." She hurried inside and returned with a little woven basket filled with the stuffed toys. "Take this with you when you go. Make sure she has one for each of her cats. If that's not enough, you let me know, and I'll whip up a few more, okay?" She thrust the basket into Kathy's arms and pulled the shawl a little tighter around her shoulders. Are you all right?" The words were out before Kathy had given them a moment's thought, and Kathy wanted to bite off her tongue. For several moments, Willow didn't answer, but let her eyes drift across the patio from pot to pot and plant to plant. Finally, she said, "Do you see that tree over there?" She pointed at a tree that grew along the little creek beyond the mulberry tree. "Do you know what that is?" Kathy didn't recognize it. It looked more like a shrub than a tree. She shook her head. "It's an elderberry tree. That tree is how I knew I belonged here when I came looking a few weeks ago. That tree was my Christmas gift from God." Willow smiled, the tender way a mother does when looking at her child. "It shouldn't be growing there, not on its own like that. Even though they grow beautifully up north, and especially in the Central Valley, here in Southern California, especially in this arid climate, these trees require a fair amount of attention in order to survive. They prefer moist soil, cool nights, a sunny spot, and other elderberry trees. But look," Willow pointed at the little creek. "That tree is growing in the one spot where it will find everything it needs: rich soil, water, sun." She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders, but kept her eyes on the tree. "One of my favorite verses in the Bible is in Jeremiah, where it says, 'He, or she in my case, is like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream, and does not fear when heat comes, for its leaves remain green, and is not anxious in the year of drought, for it does not cease to bear fruit.'" She turned back to Kathy then, the gentle smile still on her face. "I'm like that tree. I'm in a place right now where growing feels almost impossible, but God is teaching me to send out my roots toward the water, to choose life, and maybe to bloom where I'm planted, even to bear fruit. For now, this is where I'm planted." She stepped back, opened her arms wide, and faced the little cottage. Welcome to Elderberry Croft, Kathy Kekoa. Meet Richard and Patty and their son Ivan in February Embers, Part 2 of Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart. Pick up your copy today. We hope you have enjoyed this production of January Breeze, Part 1 of Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart. Copyright 2014 by Becky Dowdy. Production copyright 2022 by Becky Dowdy. This is a Brave Hearts Press audio production. Thank you for listening.